All right, let's get into it. Crime and punishment in modern Britain. If you're shooting for a grade 9 in your GCSE history exam, then you are in exactly the right place. We're going to break down the absolutely massive changes from 1900 right up to today, giving you everything you need to nail this topic.
So let's kick off with the big question. How on earth did Britain go from public hangings to slapping electronic tags on people's ankles in, 100 years? I mean, that is a huge shift. And look, understanding this isn't just about memorizing a list of dates and facts. The real key, the thing that's going to get you that grade 9, is explaining why it all changed. That's what we're going to focus on.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this whole topic. We'll start with how crime itself was redefined. Then we'll look at policing in a modern Britain and the purpose of punishment. And we'll wrap it all up with how to use this stuff to absolutely smash your exam and get that grade 9. First things first, let's talk about how the actual definition of crime got a complete makeover. You see, it's not just that a bunch of new crimes popped up. The whole idea of what it even means to be a criminal was turned on its head.
Okay, so this is a really key point, something examiners are always looking for. It's kind of like two sides of the same coin. On one side, you've got these old school crimes, like smuggling, right? They didn't disappear. They just evolved. Instead of tea, it became illegal drugs or even people trafficking. But on the other side, you had this explosion of brand new crimes that, honestly, your great-grandparents wouldn't have even understood.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Every single crime on this list is a direct consequence of society changing. Think about it. No cars, no speeding tickets. Simple as that. As society became more aware of equality, bam, you get the Race Relations Act in 1965. And suddenly, discrimination is a crime. Computers are invented. Well, of course, computer hacking follows. You see the pattern here, right? Change in society equals new types of crime. And that brings us to a massive exam tip. Look, anyone can list off a few new crimes. That's a decent answer. But for a grade 9 answer, you have to explain why they emerged. You've got to connect the dots. Link the invention of the car to driving laws. Link shifting social values to race hate laws. Always be asking yourself, what was going on in Britain at the time that created the need for this new law? Right, so with all these new and different crimes, how did the police keep up? Well, the traditional Bobby on the beat just wasn't going to cut it anymore. They had to adapt, and fast. And this timeline, wow, it really tells the whole story of policing in the 20th century. It is a story of science and tech, pure and simple. Just look at how fast things started moving. You go from fingerprinting in 1901 to two-way radios in cars in the 30s, and then the ultimate game changer, DNA fingerprinting in 1984. This stuff literally revolutionized police work. Investigations went from guesswork to hard scientific evidence. So, because of all this new tech, the police force couldn't just be generalists anymore. They had to specialize. All of a sudden, you needed experts, forensic scientists, drug squads, fraud squads, people who really knew their stuff. And it wasn't just about catching the bad guys after the fact, either. The creation of things like the Neighborhood Watch in 1982 shows a big shift towards trying to prevent crime from happening in the first place. Okay, now we're getting to what is maybe the single biggest, most controversial change of the whole period. It's all about a fundamental question. What is punishment actually for? Is it just about revenge, making criminals pay? Or should we be trying to reform them, to make them better? And you simply cannot talk about the shift without talking about the Derek Bentley case. This is huge. Bentley was executed for the murder of a police officer, right? But he didn't even fire the gun. His 16-year-old accomplice did. The whole conviction hinged on these three little words. Let him have it, Chris. Did he mean give him the gun or shoot him? Nobody knows for sure. And his hanging just ignited this massive public firestorm about what justice really means and whether the death penalty was fair at all. And you can see the direct fallout on this timeline. It's a perfect chain reaction. The public is outraged by the Bentley hanging in 53. A few years later, in 57, the Homicide Act limits the death penalty. Then it's suspended, and finally in 1969, it's gone for good. It was an instant, but it was a clear process, all kicked off by that one controversial case. It's the perfect example of how a single event can be a catalyst for massive, fundamental change in the law. Here's another really interesting example of shifting attitudes: conscientious objectors. We're talking about men who, for moral or religious reasons, refused to fight in the world wars. Back then, that was a crime. They were called conchies, thrown in prison, and publicly shamed. It's a stark reminder of a time when punishment was all about retribution and deterrence, making an example of someone. It just goes to show how radically different that mindset is from today's focus on rehabilitation. So, with the death penalty off the table, a whole new way of thinking started to gain ground. The big idea was rehabilitation, and this led to a boom in alternatives to just locking people up in a traditional prison. You started to see open prisons, which were lower security and focused on reform. You got special institutions for young offenders to keep them away from hardened criminals. And, of course, things like community service and probation became way more common. All of this points to one big idea. Let's try to fix the problem, not just punish the person. Okay, deep breath. We've covered a ton of ground. Crime, policing, punishment. So for this last part, let's get super practical and talk about how you turn all this information into a killer grade 9 answer. Seriously, if you only remember one thing, let it be this. The difference between a pretty good answer and an absolutely brilliant one is just one word: why. A good answer will describe what changed. The death penalty was abolished. Police started using DNA. Fine. But a great grade 9 answer explains why it changed. Public anger over the Derek Bentley case, combined with a shift in social attitudes, forced the government to abolish the death penalty. You see, it's all about linking the different factors together to build a proper argument. So this is basically your pre-flight checklist before you start writing in the exam. Run through it in your head. Have I linked the change to its cause, like technology or new ideas? Have I used a specific example, like Bentley or the conscientious objectors? Am I showing both continuity and change? And most importantly, am I connecting all the dots between crime, policing, and punishment? If you can tick these boxes, you're on your way to building a really strong analytical answer. And I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. We've talked about the what and the why of the last 100 years. So what's next? What do you think is going to be the next huge change in crime and punishment? Think about AI, the metaverse, cybercrime. When you can start using the same analytical skills we've talked about to think about the future, that's when you know you've really truly cracked this topic.